Hi, it's Dwyer. It's August 24th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, let me just say what I'm going to say here is really one man's opinion. There are different opinions out there, as you could imagine. Right? Ben Davison, the trainer of Moses Atama, the guy who trained Anthony Joshua in a fight where Joshua looked magnificent, the Joshua Otto Wallin fight. Ben Davison is one of the elite trainers in boxing today. He does not believe in fighters who switch from lefty to righty and back. Right? He feels that makes the fight too confusing to the fighter. That things drop when a fighter shifts from righty to lefty and lefty to righty. He feels that defense drops. He feels that, the fighter can be timed. Right? He prefers fighters who just stick to their stance. That's a school of thought, right? I'm not from that school of thought. Let me point out that, growing up, I was really a baseball guy, and I always looked up to switch hitters, right? Guys who could come out and could decide, okay, look, I'm going to bat lefty, right? For me, one of the biggest moments in baseball history is the idea that Mickey Mantle, and you don't know Mickey unless you understood that he's a switch hitter. Mickey Mantle won the Triple Crown in baseball with numbers good enough to win the Triple Crown, to win the categories, home runs, RBIs, and average in both leagues. Right? So understand, to me, when I'm watching a fight and Tyson Fury comes out, big man, moves extremely well, right? This is the big man's big man, right? And then he has you on a shoulder and he can pivot and go lefty. That's a drop jaw moment for me. Right? When you see Tyson Fury and he's fighting for stretches as a lefty, I find myself asking the question of this guy's upside. Who in the sport ever had a higher upside at heavyweight? Right? I think a guy who's ambidextrous, who's fluid, who can switch, has a decided advantage, right? Longtime viewers here to my site know I was a big fan of Dmitry Pirog, right? I picked him over Danny Jacobs. Pirog could switch. I was a big fan of James DeGale. Now, DeGale, like Fury, left a lot of his career on the table. But DeGale, at one point in his career, people forget this, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, was fighting Andre Durrell, and beat him. Right? DeGale was a guy who could switch flawlessly. In fact, DeGale was interesting because he could switch better than most. He actually could fight in between righty and lefty, right? Unique skill set. Well, I need for folks to understand that you don't know Crawford unless you realize that Crawford can switch. Let me go one step further. This is a superhero era, right? The Superman movie did well this summer. For me, the superhero who has the best set of villains is Batman. right? I admit I'm more of a Batman guy than a Superman guy. Because Batman has the Joker. Batman has the Riddler, right? Batman has the Penguin. Just understand, all of these guys have different pluses and minuses. All of these guys bring different attributes to the table, right? Just understand that Crawford is that rare fighter who in different fights can be Joker, Riddler, and Penguin, right? This is a guy who, quite frankly, is the serial killer you can't profile, right? This is the guy who's different guys on different nights. Now, Crawford's unbeaten as I make this video. This is a guy, and I know there's a lot of revisionist history out there. I'll agree, he got hurt by Yorkie's Gamboa at a lower weight. I'm not going to dispute that, right? I'll even go further and say I watched the fight as it happened, and I saw Mean Machine drop him. The ref missed it, but in real time, you knew it was a knockdown. I've seen Crawford knocked down, right? I thought the Sean Porter fight hung in the balance going into the later rounds, right? Now, Crawford did what great fighters do. He got the knockdown, right? But understand, that fight's a jump ball late. So let me just say, I recognize who Crawford is. I understand firmly Crawford's one of the best fighters I've seen, right? Very unique skill set. Righty, lefty. Different fighter every fight. But I also know who Canelo is, right? And let me put it to you this way. Crawford did something very shrewd. He got one of the two guys who beat Canelo officially, right? Some Canelo fights were razor close. I know I've been enough of a critic of Canelo where I have subscribers. Aztec Warrior, for example. You might see him in my comment section from time to time, who feel I'm biased against Canelo. Okay, fair enough. The Erislandy Lara fight, ooh, that could have gone either way. I saw the Cotto fight as it happened. They had live scoring. Let's say I disagreed with the live scoring, right? I'll say the Austin Trout fight is a close fight. I saw the first two Golovkin fights. I didn't see a fight that was a draw. I didn't see a fight that Golovkin lost, right? Sure, when Golovkin leaves Abel Sanchez, the dynamic change, right? Golovkin gets older, Canelo waits him out. Okay, fine, we get it. But the first two fights, I thought Canelo lost. But understand, Crawford gets Dimitri Bivol into his camp. Bivol is supposed to have the know-how on how to beat Canelo, right? And Bivol's interesting because Bivol, one of the best back foots in boxing. Let me say too, I saw both Bivol-Beterbiev fights. I haven't seen Bivol lose to Beterbiev yet. The judges gave the first fight to Beterbiev. I saw Bivol in against another Hall of Famer. I think this is Bivol's best fight. He was in against Zurdo. Gilberto Ramirez. Understand, Ramirez is a champion at cruiser. Ramirez is having shoulder surgery for fighters. Few things are more urgent, maybe hand surgery, than shoulder surgery, right? Few things endanger a career more. We're going to have to watch to see how he comes back, right? But understand, Bivol can be a combination puncher. Bivol can actually be offensive. I thought Crawford picked one of the best people imaginable to be a sparring partner. I think a big part of boxing when you're a gambler is figuring out how can this fighter prepare for his upcoming opponent? Who can he bring into camp? Who can duplicate some strategy he can use against his upcoming opponent? So Crawford picked a guy who's defensively blessed, and understand, few guys are defensively blessed. You're operating at 30,000 feet with the Crawford, who's defensively blessed, Canelo, who's defensively blessed, fight. So, of course, they bring in Bivol, who's defensively blessed to the point where, in rounds 4, 5, and 6, both fights, against Beterbiev, he decides, okay, I've started fast. I'm going to let this guy fire all his shots. And you'll notice Bivol's on his back foot rounds 4, 6, and 5 against Beterbiev, both fights. He lets Beterbiev be on his front foot, be throwing a lot of punches. Bivol's strategy is to let Beterbiev get caught in a rhythm. He doesn't want Beterbiev thinking. He wants Beterbiev going with his plan A. Have Beterbiev tire himself out, right? Because Bivol has plans for the second half of the fight. And he's going to simply survive those 3 rounds, be on his back foot, let Beterbiev punch himself out, and then, while Beterbiev thinks he can win with his plan A, come out in the later part of the fight and actually counterpunch and beat Beterbiev's plan A. In my opinion, that's what Bivol did both fights. Right, so Crawford is with a master tactician who is a master on his back foot, who knew how to counter Canelo, right, who's comfortable sticking to his construct, being on his back foot, not getting lured into a shootout with Saul Alvarez. Well, believe it or not, Canelo has topped that. Canelo got the one guy in camp who could duplicate Terence Crawford, right? Canelo didn't go the who's giving Crawford a hard time. He didn't go the Sean Porter route. He didn't go the Erislandy Lara route because he understood. He's not fighting one style, right? This is the genius of Crawford. He's not fighting the Joker. He's fighting a guy who can be the Joker, the next night be the Penguin, the next night be the Riddler. So Canelo doesn't go for a guy who can model himself after an effective opponent of Crawford. He found a guy who could model Crawford himself. And the guy he picked in this world of righty-lefty, right? To imitate Crawford, you have to be a guy who can be ambidextrous. You have to be a guy who could come out, prioritize a jab like Crawford did against Errol Spence. A guy who could hit and run. Be on your back foot like Ali, but be enough in the pocket to get knockdowns in the fight, like younger Ali. Right? The Crawford who fought Victor Postal. I'm telling you, that's the Crawford. That's his best chance against Canelo. That's the guy he's going to be, especially after Canelo's William Skull fight. Well, understand, Canelo got all of that because Canelo has been sparring with Jaron Ennis. Right now, let me say this about Ennis. Ennis is interesting. He used to be defensively blessed. But in my eyes, his defense has degraded of late. Right now, I don't know whether that's by design. I don't know whether it's because in boxing you lose some skills as you get older. Reflexes dim. Right? Let me just openly say that as I sit here, I think Crawford is better defensively than Jaron Ennis. But it's not going to matter. If Canelo enters this fight and he needs a fighter who can be in the pocket, Ennis is offensively blessed, who can be in the pocket, who can fight a pocket-centric fight, who could also be on his back foot and fight a fight without a set pocket. Right? At a minimum, a mobile pocket. Who, you come up on him one way, he's a righty. You come up on him another way, he's a lefty. He could be a pot shotter. He could be a combination puncher. Right? The genius of Jaron Ennis is the same genius of Terence Crawford. It's his versatility. And, like Crawford, look at the knockout percentage. Ennis, when he wants, can punch. Let me say this too. Ennis has a secret. We see him on TV, it doesn't quite come through. Right? You see his father in his corner and you say, oh, here's a dad and he's helping son. And, this is a family affair. Jaron is obviously the star of the family. And, his father, of course, has been in boxing for years and is helping his son. And his son knows that dad has his back. He's not dealing with the piranhas of boxing. He's dealing with someone he can trust. Right? No, understand. Stephen Fulton, right? One of the best boxer punchers in the sport. Right? A guy who fought, lost, but fought in a way. Right? Stephen Fulton's trainer is Boozy Ennis. Understand, when you look at Jaron Ennis, you have to ask a question. Is Jaron Ennis a singular talent who is leading his family to greatness? Or is Jaron Ennis more of a Joe Montana, who, when you look a little bit closer at the Montana story, you see a revolutionary over his shoulder, Bill Walsh, right? One of the best coaches I've ever seen, right? A guy doing odd things that allow a running back, Roger Craig, to be football's first 1,000-yard rusher, 1,000-yard receiver in a season, right? Doing things where, in a football world where, there's powerhouses left and right, particularly back then, right? USC, Ohio State, Miami, right? Bill Walsh, of course, is at Mississippi Valley State, right? Picking a wide receiver who didn't have Randy Moss speed, Jerry Rice, right? My point to you is this. Is Jaron Ennis a talent the family adjusted to, or is Boozy Ennis a Bill Walsh type who said to his son, player, now let's learn how to do this with your offhand. Right? Hey, Jaron, all right, you can trade in the pocket, Now let's try to do this with your offhand without a pocket. Right? So Ennis, who I've criticized here, and understand, when I'm criticizing boxers, the reason why I'm deconstructing Canelo's game, the reason why I'm deconstructing Jaron Ennis's game, is because these are guys at the top of the food chain. Right? Talented and skilled fighters get scrutinized. Right? You don't hear me scrutinizing some guy who is a gimmick. Right? I'm not here talking about Butterbean or, no, it's the top fighters. Right? When I'm talking about the heavyweight division, of course, I'm talking about Usyk, Fury, Joshua. Right? There's a Joshua crowd out there that thinks I'm picking on their guy. Right? I'm picking on their guy because their guy has been heavyweight champ. Their guy has been an Olympic champion. Right? We talk about the top fighters of the era. So here's Canelo, who I think already has everything on his side of the ledger. Right? He's the guy who has been undisputed at 168. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line. Right? He's the guy who I don't have to ask questions. I have to ask about Crawford. Right? Can Canelo get knockouts at 168? I know the answer is yes, because I followed Canelo's career. I've seen Canelo at 175 stop a current champion, Kovalev, a guy who beat Anthony Yarde, by the way, right? Who, of course, is fighting Benavidez. I've seen Canelo have fights where he's just defensively blessed. Folks, Danny Jacobs, for stretches of that fight, couldn't hit him. Right? Let me also say, too, I've been to Vegas during Mexican Independence Day. I've been to Vegas for Canelo fights, right? I never attend the fight. I'm always in some sports book someplace. But put it this way, I know Canelo's popularity. Right, folks? I've seen great fighters who weren't popular. History's flooded with them. My own personal favorite fighter in history, and I'm not bashful about it, is Jack Johnson. Right? Jack Johnson was never America's favorite. Understand, Jack Johnson, Congress passes the Mann Act in part because of Jack Johnson. Right? There used to be open talk in the United States of white slavery. Right? People wanted to believe that these women around Jack Johnson weren't there voluntarily. Right? So let me just say, I've seen great fighters. In fact, in this video, I'm going to talk about another great fighter who was unpopular for a stretch early in his career. There'll be a link in the comment section to this guy fighting at a sold-out Madison Square Garden, where after the fight, the crowd booed the decision. This guy, 21-year-old Muhammad Ali, had just beaten a New Yorker, Doug Jones, the third-ranked heavyweight. Ali at the time was a second-ranked heavyweight. Right? And two judges had the fight, 5 rounds for Ali, 4 rounds for Doug Jones, and 1 round even. That's how close it was, folks. The referee had Ali winning by a wide margin. Right? The crowd boos him. People did not like young Ali. Right? Forget the Olympic gold medal. Let's go by the actual tape. Right? And, of course, Ali, as only Ali can, he boos the crowd at the end of the fight. It's on the film. Well, let me just say, Crawford is a guy who was a late starter. right? People didn't know who he was. It's Mikey Garcia who said to his promoter, "This guy I just fought, he's special." Right? Understand, there's a Timothy Bradley story where Timothy Bradley's the champion. Right? Bradley, by the way, one of the best, with Sergio Mora, one of the best boxing commentators I've ever heard. Well, Bradley talks about how he's preparing for Devin Alexander. He has a superstar fight. So here he is, his sparring partner shows up. He doesn't know who the sparring partner is. The sparring partner shows up, no entourage. Bomac's not even there. Sparring partner is Terrence Crawford. Bradley says he then starts sparring with Crawford, and it's competitive. Then it reaches a point where Bradley realizes that his unknown sparring partner is better than he is. So the next day, Bradley comes prepared for the sparring partner. Forget Devin Alexander. He comes prepared for the sparring partner. And if you believe Bradley, the champ at the time, was being methodically beaten by the unknown sparring partner. Right? So, let me say this. Let's go off script here. The Latino community is similar to the black community. Right? In the 1960s, we had a Goliath. He even won Best Actor Oscar. And keep in mind, this is just a few years after Dorothy Dandridge was nominated for Best Actress and was not allowed at the Academy Awards to sit with the other contestants for the Oscar. So along comes Sidney Poitier. Guess who's coming to dinner? Right? And Poitier, in the 60s, right? We understand he's Caribbean. He came up with an accent, but he's an actor. So here's Poitier speaking the King's English. Right? He's taking hard roles. Right? In the heat of the night. They call me Mr. Tibbs. Right? This is a guy who's socially relevant. But then the black community started rebelling against him. This is the brother who's made it. Black community starts rebelling against him. He doesn't sound black enough. Think about that. Right? The black actor who's poor, who's not even born in the continental United States, who works to learn the King's English, who is socially fluid in movies, is taking on roles where he's handcuffed to Tony Curtis, right? Where he's, the black guy who some white woman is introducing to her family, right? And of course her family has Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, a real couple at a time when, of course, Tracy is married to someone else. That's another story. Well, anyway, just to understand, Sidney Poitier is a giant at the time. And parts of the black community got tired of him. We wanted to see brothers with pork chop sideburns. We wanted to see brothers we understood. Right? So it is breathtaking when you get to Shaft, Richard Roundtree. When you get to Black Caesar, Fred Williamson. Right? That's what the black community wanted to see. You get to Superfly, Ron O'Neal. Right? We had Sidney Poitier fatigue. And when the Latino community, just to understand, and I was surprised, there's blowback against Canelo. Aztec Warrior shouldn't be bothered over my videos. He should be bothered by what Juan Manuel Marquez says on his podcast. Right? He should be bothered by the lack of community between one of Canelo's idols, Oscar De La Hoya, and Canelo today, right? Just understand, I was on X, just anonymous, right? I was, just following comments on X. Canelo was fighting Jaime Munguia. I said, let me see how fans are viewing this. And in that matchup, you had a group, younger Latinos, I believe, right? Just looking at the, pictures and stuff like that of the posters. And they were tired of Canelo, right? This is Sidney Poitier fatigue, right? You have one of the best fighters of the last 30 years. He is real. He's going through champions. He's going through Hall of Famers. He's going through divisions, right? He has some fights where the other fighter comes in unbeaten, Callum Smith, right? Canelo starts hitting him on the arms. And of course, Canelo pops a bicep on Callum Smith, who then spends the rest of the fight moving away from Canelo. Right, folks? This is a great talent. And yet, young Latinos on the extreme I was on wanted Jaime Munguia to win. It was time for a new day. It was time for Richard Roundtree, Fred Williamson, Ron O'Neal. They were tired of, their, parents' fighter, right? They wanted their own fighter. So let me just say, I recognize there's some Canelo fatigue. But I need to be blunt here, right? You're in a post-Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard world, right? And Crawford's going to have to fight like Ray Leonard to win the fight, right? I don't buy the muscles. I think the muscles are a distraction. I think Crawford's bulked up as a head fake because he knows he doesn't even have the option of staying in the pocket against Canelo. He's going to have to move. He's going to have to fight the fight he fought against Victor Postal. Right? He knows he's going to have to. So let me just say, just understand, Canelo is much more popular than Marvin Hagler. Let me also say, too, that there's a group, and folks, it's been, 87 was 25 plus 13. It's been 38 years. And there's a group that has not died down. That every time they're asked the question, how could a guy fight a dominant multi-year champion and take his title on his back foot without hurting the champ, moving away, right? My point to you is Canelo's too popular. He's the incumbent. There are going to be a lot of people, and I mean this, who, if you get to the start of the 5th round and Canelo is not staggered, he's not hurt, let's say he doesn't come out as southpaw the first 2 rounds, like Hagler southpaw came out as a righty the first 2 rounds. He doesn't give away 2 rounds. There are going to be a lot of people who, by the start of the 5th round, are going to say, Crawford has not done enough. And I know many of you dispute this concept. But Crawford has not done enough to take Canelo's titles. And understand here we're talking about an undisputed champion. Also, at Allegiant Stadium, you're going to notice the popularity gap. There are going to be many Crawford supporters at the stadium who have no idea how popular Canelo is, right? I understand there's that group that, has fatigue, has Sidney Poitier fatigue when it comes to Canelo, right? But I'm guessing 80% of the crowd at Allegiant Stadium is going to be for Saul Alvarez, right? Let me say, too, you have another group. They're not really tied to either boxer. What they're tied to is tradition, right? There's a certain audacity with Terence Crawford, right? One fight at 154, and now you're going to try to convince me that you can beat a reigning 168-pound champion? Let me say this. At a time when boxing had 8 weight classes, Henry Armstrong grabbed 3 of the titles. Now he then fights a guy, the middleweight champion, right? Armstrong, who already is in rarefied air, who you already have to consider a Hall of Famer, right? Some dude has 3 of 8 titles. It's like, who's done that before? Who's been more successful than this? He went up to middleweight. He fought for the middleweight title. Please Google that fight. Henry Armstrong, middleweight title. Folks, he got hit with Sidney Poitier fatigue. Right? In a fight, many people thought he won. The fight was declared a draw. That's what stops Armstrong from getting that 4th belt. Let's think about the crowd that would support the draw. I'm sure there was a crowd that said, some guy thinks he can come up to middleweight and just take the title. Again, you have to beat the champ to take his title. If the fight was close, there are many people who are not going to look at the film and say, gee, who hit the tape first? No. They're going to say, this fight was too close for the title to change hands. I know there are people who say every fight should be a one-off. Who won this fight? Treat this like a track meet. But you and I know boxing has a political element. Right? You and I understand that the judges know who's paying the bills. Right? Some judge is in Vegas. He's been at a 5-star hotel. He realizes that Canelo is the cash cow in this fight, that Canelo has been loved, that Canelo has the track record leading up to 168. In fact, it's beyond that, right? It goes to 175, right? Canelo has a track record, between the two guys. I believe Crawford fought excellent fighters. But there is a difference, isn't there? Right? Canelo fought fighters when they had titles and were unbeaten. Right? Caleb Plant, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith. Right? Canelo had dodgy fights where he's fighting a champion who has a record KO streak in title defenses, who you thought he was biting off more than he could chew. And that's Golovkin. Right? It's mind-blowing. Floyd did Canelo a favor. In fact, they did each other a favor. It's mind-blowing to think that a young Canelo hopped in the ring with Mayweather. Right? Now, the favor Floyd did him was Floyd retired unbeaten. Right? So you look at that fight, you say, well, Canelo fought the best. And he was the best, right? Never lost after that. But, you're thinking, well, if Canelo's in the ring with Floyd, with Shane, with Miguel, with Danny, with Gennady, right? If Canelo's in the ring with these men, right? Rocky Fielding, right? Mr. Robot, Avni Durham. If he's in the ring with all of these guys, And his only losses were to two obvious Hall of Famers: Mayweather, right, who's in the Hall of Fame, and Dimitri Bivol, right? Then Canelo's the guy who has had the more historical career, as historical as Crawford's career has been, right? So, in my opinion, all Canelo has to do to be awarded this fight is to, number one, not throw away rounds like Hagler throws away the first two rounds. In other words, no gimmicks. No, hey, I'm fighting southpaw. Look, throw that out the window. Use every round, right? Be on his front foot. Treat Crawford however he looks, right? Crawford's all bulked up and stuff. Treat Crawford like a guy whose last knockout was at 147 pounds. If Canelo, and understand, Canelo's defensively blessed in a way Marvin Hagler was not, right? Hagler's forte was the shootout, right? Thomas Hearns, John the Beast Mugabe, where it's blood and guts, where the guy who walked around with the hat that had war on it was at war, right? So he's landing shots, Hearns is landing shots, they're landing shots, it's high volume, right? No one's gonna, try to clinch or anything like that. It's testosterone. That's Marvin Hagler. Canelo can be aggressive on his front foot. You throw back at him, and you're going to find out that Canelo's head's on a swivel. Not only that, Canelo can fight low. Canelo can hide his neck. Canelo is moving as you're throwing the shot, right? If Canelo's just active, if Canelo isn't staggered or dropped, if there are no moments like the moment he had against Miguel Cotto's brother, that's really one of Canelo's dodgiest fights. He wins by stoppage, but understand he's badly hurt in that fight. Crawford needs to badly hurt Canelo in this fight. If Canelo's not badly hurt, folks, it's Canelo in Vegas. He starts with a 2-round advantage, right? If it's close, let's give Canelo another round or two, because there is that crowd that's going to say, look, if you're going to beat a champion, worse yet, an undisputed champion, it has to be Roy Jones, James Toney. It has to be the kind of fight where you're looking at the fight and you're saying, my God, I did not realize that there was this much of a foot speed discrepancy between the two. Let me just point out that because we're now post James Toney, Roy Jones, Canelo's not going to fall into the trap that James Toney did, especially now that he was fortunate to be awarded the victory over William Skull, who could have gotten that decision. I've seen Canelo break stride on his foot speed. In other words, you're backing away, he'll just run over to you, right? He's religious about having his left foot in front of his right foot. He has, well-schooled, foot spacing and stuff like that. But I've seen Canelo, the Jermell Charlo fight. I've seen Canelo break stride where he says, forget all this foot stuff. Let me just run over to this guy. He can run over to Terence Crawford. If he's active and fights the fight that Roberto Duran fought against Ray Leonard in their first fight, folks, it's going to be almost impossible for Terence Crawford to win the fight, because it's not for Crawford's titles. He's fighting the champion in Vegas on a Mexican holiday, right? Unless he has some kind of Roy Jones moment, and let's remember, Jones knocks down Toney. If you're watching that fight and you're confused, Jones makes it easy for you to understand. Jones knocks down Tony. Jones is, matching Tony otherwise in the fight. He's exceeding Tony in terms of foot speed and physical gifts. But I need for folks to also understand Crawford, as good as he is not the freak athlete that Roy Jones is, that Floyd Mayweather is. Those guys were freak athletes. Can I add another name? That Dimitri Bivol is. Right? You know the freak athlete. Look at rounds 4, 5, and 6 of both Bivol-Beterbiev fights. Here is one of the premier closers. Understand, before he met Bivol, Beterbiev never went the distance in a pro fight. Here's a guy who's a puncher, a closer, a guy who went to the UK and stopped Anthony Yard, right? You know Beterbiev's all about action. A guy who went to the tri-state area and stopped Joe Smith. A guy who returns home, stops Callum Smith. Here he is running at Bivol, and Bivol's on his back foot, right? Bivol has the back foot completely synced, right? Is blocking shots, is moving away. After he gives away the 3 rounds, he then gets back in the saddle. He has a more tired Beterbiev, and then he shows Beterbiev, player, your A game is not enough to overcome me. Right now I'm going to counter you to death. Right? You're still not going to be able to catch me. Right? You're not going to be able to find me, and I'm going to be right in front of you. Right? Crawford does a lot of things great. But he's not the freak athlete of the guys who beat Canelo and could pull this off. Right? Let's talk about Ali Roy Jones. In preparing for this fight, I thought, okay, I don't think you can beat a front foot, guy who's higher ranked, who's coming at you, who's active on your back foot. By the way, let's remember, the judges did not give Bivol the first Beterbiev fight. Right? In other words, brilliant back foot game. Brilliant. Right? At the end of the fight, you look at the corners, the Bivol crowd thought they won the fight. The Beterbiev crowd looked a little bit humdrum, didn't they? That fight, they gave it to the front foot guy. That fight. Right? So I went looking. I said, who's the lighter guy who fought a great fighter? A great fighter. Who offset the weight gap. Who was able to counter this great fighter and pull the crowd to his side. Folks, old-timers know this fight. Younger people might not, because when we remember Ali in the 60s, you remember the fights where he hits the canvas. Right? The Sonny Banks fight. The Henry Cooper fight. In my favorites folder right now is a must-watch. If Terence Crawford is going to try to beat Canelo from inside the pocket, he's going to have to fight like Doug Jones, the number 3 contender at the time. A guy who got $75,000 to fight Ali in front of a sold-out Madison Square Garden in 1963. Right? This is right before Ali fights Liston. Ali would fight Liston 11 months later. Ali, this is the fight in the 60s where Ali doesn't get knocked down, then gets off the canvas and is able to stop the other guy. No, this is the troubling fight where Ali's fighting a lighter guy and Ali is pushed. As I mentioned earlier, 2 judges had it 5-4 and 1 for Ali. Ali does not win this fight. if it's not for the 10th round. That's how close it is. This is Ali under pressure by a guy he outweighs. Doug Jones does not weigh 190 pounds. Right? The secret to Doug Jones, and you need to know this, they don't tell you this on the film, is that Doug Jones had beaten Zora Fali, future Ali opponent, right? He also had beaten, this is before this fight, Boxing Hall of Famer, one of the legends at light heavyweight, one of the hardest punchers in boxing history, the guy who beat Dick Tiger, Bob Foster. Understand, Foster was so good that this light heavyweight champion would go on to fight Joe Frazier and Ali. Right? That's how good Bob Foster was. By the way, Foster claimed Frazier hit harder than Ali. Just food for thought. Well, understand what Doug Jones does. He somehow lures Ali in the pocket. Right? Doug's upper body is on a swivel. Now, this is the kind of fight that, let's just say, it's boxing hardcore people who would appreciate this fight. Right? This is a fight where once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right? Doug Jones is inside of Ali. You realize Ali is, at times, predominantly a hooker. Those are his combinations. Right? Ali's taller than this man. Heavier than this man. Ali comes in the pocket. Doug Jones is inside of the hooks. He has his hands high. He has a high defense. Unlike Ali, who's relying on reflexes for defense. Doug Jones is relying on technique. Right? So he blocks Ali's shots. He keeps his hands up. And like Dimitri Bivol, this is the blessed counterpuncher. So while he has Ali in the pocket, as Ali throws punches, fast hands, Ali's Ali, right? 21, still figuring it out. Doug Jones is blocking the shots, and then he's throwing short, tight counters. Then as Ali backs away, and this is pivotal in the fight, first round, Ali's backing away. Doug Jones follows him and continues to throw on him and land some big shots. Right? So what you have is a nip and tuck affair for 9 rounds. Then in the 10th round, Ali has a moment where he's able to get off a couple of long combinations. Right? Ali wins the 10th round, but I need for folks to understand how this fight ends. Right? They go to the scorecards. It's Ali, unanimous decision. Now, maybe that's why the fight's not remembered as it should be in history. Again, the link to the fight is going to be in the description of this video. Please watch it. This is a key part of the Ali story. Right? Just understand when they announce the scoring, and it's true, Doug Jones is a New Yorker. Madison Square Garden, of course, is in New York. Right? So the people who know Doug Jones are at the fight. Another curious fact, you had something like 25 writers there. Don't quote me on this. You do the research yourself. Believe it or not, something like 13 of the 25, a majority, thought Doug Jones won the fight. For our purposes, just understand, Ali's unbeaten at the time. When they announced the decision, and the 2 judges, right, it's a referee judging, this is the early 60s, and 2 judges. When the 2 judges have their cards 5, 4, and 1, for the higher ranked Ali, right? He was the number 2 ranked heavyweight. Doug Jones was the number 3 ranked heavyweight. Numbers 1 and 2 were Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston, right? Just understand, when they announced the decision at the arena, forget the reporters, right? And as you can imagine, this is New York press, they're tough, right? Forget the reporters who, as a group, give Doug Jones the edge. But I need for folks to understand that when they announce the winner, the crowd starts booing. So Ali, of course, looks at the crowd and starts imitating the crowd, and he starts booing the crowd. Right? Then it's interesting because you realize Ali's not loved. In 1963, I'm calling him Ali. Folks, he's Cassius Clay here. Ali is not loved as Cassius Clay. He hasn't yet declared himself Muhammad Ali in 1963. Right? You realize that the crowd, forget the writers, the crowd favored Doug Jones in this fight. Well, Doug Jones would go on to fight Ernie Terrell for the WBA Heavyweight Championship. Right? And Jones would lose that fight. Then he would retire 1 year later. Right? But just understand, Jones had some big wins. Terrell, of course, is the guy who called Ali Clay, which led to Ali, yelling at him, "What's my name?" during that famous fight, right? Understand how good the Ali Doug Jones fight was. Folks, it's Ring Magazine's 1963 Fight of the Year. Now, if Crawford decides to be in the pocket with Canelo, if he's going to imitate Bivol, who is close enough to Canelo to land short counters, right? If he's going to have his hands up, and if he's going to take Canelo's titles from inside the pocket, win over the stadium crowd, and understand, Allegiant Stadium has many more seats than Madison Square Garden. Right? Just understand, it's such a tall order that Doug Jones lost to Ali, fighting an exemplary fight using in the pocket tactics, right? Against a guy who's not as loved at the time. This is before Ali doesn't go to Vietnam, is kicked out of boxing, shows up on Johnny Carson, is good friends with Howard Cosell, makes it back into boxing, right? Then you had all these protesters saying, "I'm with him," right? Ali, of course, took a tour of college campuses, spoke at college campuses before anti-war protesters. Right? Just understand, this Ali is not as popular as Canelo is today. And understand, if Crawford is in the pocket and fights the Doug Jones fight, there's a chance he still loses. Understand, too, the Ali who fought Doug Jones was not heavyweight champion. The minute you have a belt, much less 4, like Canelo has, right? There's going to be you have to beat the champ to take his title crowd, right? They're going to say, nah, this fight's too close, right? If they looked at their scorecards and they thought 5-4-1 for Crawford, they're going to say, man, that's too close in this post-Hagler-Leonard world for me to take the champion's titles, right? So I look at the betting odds. This is that rare fight where you look at the betting odds and you wonder, you say, wow, why aren't they wider? Don't tell me that much of the public believes a guy whose last knockout was at 147 can come up to 168, 21 pounds more, fight a guy who's never been knocked down, and take his title.